Hello, everybody, and welcome to HealTV. I am your host, and today we need to talk about the ego. It is perhaps not possible to understand and navigate relationships with other people or ourselves without an understanding of the ego and its involvement in our relationships. Though it has the reputation of being a negative thing, the ego is an essential part of each person's personality, and we all have one. It is our sense of who we are. When we say someone's ego is too big, what we're actually saying is that their belief about the importance of their self to themselves, to other people, or to the situation is disproportionate and perhaps even unhealthy. Personality is very affected by ego as well. Personality is the expression of the ego. In a manner of speaking, we could say it is the result of the ego. If someone has a dysfunctional ego, a distorted identity, and a distorted sense of self, it will affect their personality and the way they perceive themselves, as well as the way they perceive others and the world in general. Ego gets a bad rap, maybe because it's one of the most powerful drives in human nature, perhaps the most powerful, and, despite its negative reputation, is far more influential than most people realize. Entire empires have fallen because of one person's ego. Murders are committed because of people's egos. The ego is not just representative of obnoxious arrogance and grandiosity and vanity, as many believe it to be. It is much, much more than that. It is the part of us that speaks as I. To understand what this means, we can look to the work of Dr. Sigmund Freud. Freud never used the word ego in his landmark work regarding this phenomenon. His writings in German utilized the words das Ich, which means the I. The Latin translation of the word I is ego. For the majority of people, the ego is a mostly unacknowledged part of themselves, even though its influence over thoughts, feelings, and behavior is enormous. It's like a director behind the scenes of a movie production. Even though you don't see the director, they are calling virtually all of the shots, and the performance you see is the result of their vision and interpretation. Generally, only when it gets out of control or becomes noticeably dysfunctional does the ego call attention to itself and become labeled a problem. The ego shapes the way we view the world, other people, and ourselves. It interprets circumstances, situations, the behavior of others, and even random events in ways that apply to it, agree with it, or reinforce how it sees things. The more dysfunctional someone's ego and resulting personality are, the worse this is going to be. People with serious ego dysfunction interpret events incorrectly all the time. This is called having ideas of reference, meaning a person has the idea that events, words, and actions are referencing them or directed at them when they're not. This is the result of egocentricity, which is the belief that the ego, the self, is not just the only thing that matters to itself, but is also the center of everything in general. Even if someone is not disordered, there will likely still be times when they believe things are about them or directed at them when they're not. They may believe events or the behaviors of other people have connotations or motives that they don't really have, or that things are directed at them or the things to which they have attached identity when they're not. This happens because the ego really can only see itself. It cannot see that there could be any other reason other than itself for things happening which affect it. This affects me, therefore it must be about me or because of me. This is one of the reasons it's crucial to become aware of the stories our ego is telling us. If we don't learn to observe and challenge our ego, it will continue to run things unchecked behind the scenes. One of the ego's jobs is to protect us, thereby protecting itself. Because of this, it creates narratives and stories about us and the world that help it feel secure. It desires above all else to be validated, to be seen, heard, acknowledged, chosen. These things validate our existence, our importance, which of course means they validate the ego's existence and the ego's importance. Being able to believe that we are being seen, heard, acknowledged, and chosen helps human beings feel safer. When we do not believe that, the ego becomes outraged. It feels dismissed, it feels rejected, which means unseen, unimportant, ultimately unsafe. This can feel intolerable in situations where people are not aware of their ego or of these ego stories. When the ego becomes dysfunctional or is poisoned by fear, perception and interpretation of events becomes impaired. So these stories and narratives can become distorted. The ego may begin to attach too much importance to the self and other things, or not enough. It may create narratives that focus only on the self to the exclusion of other factors. The ego reacts the strongest to perceived threats. A dysfunctional ego may perceive threats where there are none, or assume that it is always under attack. It creates stories where it compares us to others and we always come up short, or where we always have to come out on top. It insists that we were not chosen because we're not good enough or because other people are better, and that if we are not chosen, this in itself is some horrible failure. It obsesses over the idea that others will receive the things we believe that we deserve, that others will outshine us, that they will receive the credit that we deserve instead, and those kinds of things. Another of the ego's jobs is to ensure that our needs are met. Generally, it's supposed to meet these needs in a way that is socially acceptable to other people and morally acceptable to ourselves. A dysfunctional, wounded ego can create a fearful narrative that the needs will never be met, or that they're always going to be ignored by other people. Therefore, getting them met through any means necessary is not only appropriate, but is justified. A wounded ego can create the story that the self matters more than any other person in the situation or the relationship, or that it matters not at all. It can focus so much on itself, its own needs, and its own pain that there's no room for anybody else in the picture, even when it appears superficially to be focusing on other people, because what this is really about is getting its own needs met always. The wounded ego panics when it believes it's not in control because this feels unsafe and means its needs will not be met. Relationships often involve ego trauma, meaning damage sustained to the sense of self. So many people in so many relationships feel unseen and unheard for who they really are. Often this is because so many people are projecting ego images and stories onto other people, then feeling disappointed and betrayed when our partners and family members don't follow the expectations we've created in our minds of how people are supposed to act or how things are supposed to go. The sad thing is, most people don't realize they're doing that. The ego believes it's always right, always justified, and anyone who disagrees with it or has a different perception is wrong. If we cannot observe our ego stories and the images it creates of other people so that we can challenge these things with objective experience, which is what we know as reality, it can cause problems in our relationships. The ego's unrelenting refrain is, "What about me?" When this is tempered with maturity, logic, self-awareness, and empathy, it results in healthy boundaries, a generally balanced mind, body, and spirit, and healthy relationships overall, including the relationship with the self. When it is not tempered with maturity, logic, self-awareness, and empathy, the result is poor boundaries, selfishness, spirit sickness, stress-related illness, and toxic, even malignant egocentricity. And helping you bring all of your systems into balance is what we are all about doing here at HealTV.